my name is Jamie Younger. Welcome to the Story Keep podcast, Who We Remember. On this show, I ask my guests a seminal question. Whose life story from your own family would you most want to have documented on film? My guests can speak about a family member who is living or deceased. This show is an outgrowth of our central mission at Story Keep, where we collaborate with families of wealth to preserve their stories and histories through legacy films and private podcasts. Since 2010, we've worked with over 100 families. And on this show, we explore the surprising histories and stories of our guests' family members. We speak about each person's essence and what impact they have made. Most of us think too late about capturing the stories of our loved ones. And these conversations elevate, honor, and speak to one person's lasting influence. I promise that you will walk away feeling inspired to think anew about your own life and the impact that you want to make. Today, I'm joined by Christian Broyhill. Her life and story are intertwined with the extraordinary life of her childhood nanny, Dawn. Christian's former nanny, Dawn, raised her from the time that she was little until she left home. Christian was born into a family of generational wealth, and from an early age, her mother and her father were occupied with family business affairs. Dawn was Christian's steady, safe parental figure. Before we fully step into Dawn's story, let me introduce you to my guest, Christian Broyhill. Christian operates NextGen Journeys. She guides important conversations about mental health and resiliency for family enterprises. She really enjoys working with NextGen family members to help them discern their own personal identity in light of their larger family narrative. She has a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and she is an accredited Enneagram practitioner. When not working, Christian really loves to hike with her daughter, and she also sings with the Duke Evensong singers at Duke Chapel. As a kid, Christian had a whole village of imaginary friends, and she spent most of her time with Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. He went with her everywhere. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Christian Broyhill in this special way. Let's dive in. Well, Christian, I am so delighted to have you sitting with me and have the chance to talk to you today. Thanks for joining me on Who We Remember. I wanted to, of course, start off and ask you the answer to the question of this show, which is, if you could document the life story of a family member on film, who would that be? And who is that for you?
I think the first person that came to me is a woman named Dawn.
And tell me about Dawn, because as I understand it, she is not your biological mom, but she played that role in many ways in your life. So give us some context of how Dawn came into your world.
So the older I get, the more I realize I can't talk about Dawn without also talking about my biological mother. It starts becoming more, used to be one or the other as I was growing up. And now I feel like their stories keep kind of winding around each other. So first, just a little bit about my mom and my family upbringing. My family is from a very, very small town in Western North Carolina. It's so small. I know people who live in the state who've never heard of the town. And but we had a furniture company there that sold shortly before I was born. My parents had been dating all through college, and guess long story short, there was a Christmas party, and they had a black tie wedding 6 weeks later. And
6 weeks later, wow, okay.
So here I am.
Okay.
Last wedding I've ever heard of. And my parents were pretty young. They were 23 and 24. And from what I have understood about my mother, my mom was I think she was voted even in high school as the most perfect and the most attractive and most likely to, so my mom's, I think, nature was already, and temperament was around someone who really strived for perfectionism. And when she joined my family, and right, I don't, sorry, I just said this, right around this time before I was born, they'd sold this furniture company, and it was a pretty public event. And in this small town in the community, everyone knows about it.
Mm.
She, I don't think I don't want to say my family pressured her, but I think that her experience of joining my family was there was a lot of pressure to be perfect. Um, and part of that pressure was that she needed to accompany my dad on all of his professional engagements. And so shortly after I was born, my understanding is it was suggested to her that she find a nanny for me.
So it was your father's side of the family that had the furniture business, and she married into that family, and she sort of took on this feeling and this role of yes, needing to accompany your dad on these official, okay.
Got a lot of pressure. Like, I will be like the most perfect partner. And part of that meant hiring a nanny to take care of me so that she could do that. And at first it was part-time. Dawn started taking care of me when I was 8 months old. And it ultimately became a full-time job for her. Dawn is the same age as my father. They're just a few months apart from each other. And she had been working, what I remember, in a factory, I think working on like a factory line, if I remember correctly. And went from there to working for my family, and did that until she died. And it turned into, over time, not just a part-time job, but a full-time job. And then ultimately a decision that she made that, job or no job, she was dedicated to raising my brother and me.
Okay. Wow. I can understand how you would want to record her life story. So you, in our prior conversations, you talked about how you really have a feeling of her being this mother figure in your life. So is that how you would sort of almost feel about the opportunity to document her life story on film, that this was the mom?
I talk about her to people and I'll call her my mom, and then people get confused because they'll be like, wait, I thought your mom died. And then I'm like, I'll be talking about my biological mom.
Right.
Right. She, yeah. So ultimately, I think in my mom's quest for perfectionism, feeling a lot of pressure to conform to what she felt was a high pressure situation in my family. It was around, early 90s. It was around this time where if you have a problem, there were all these new great psychiatric medications you could take so that you could avoid those problems and medicate them. And my mom started to really struggle with addiction to those medications. My home became a pretty unsafe home. It ultimately became pretty dark, pretty abusive, pretty violent. And again, I used to tell the story of like, she was the bad mom and Dawn was the good mom. But the reality is she just wasn't able to care for me or care for my brother. So when I was 12, I actually went to my went to my mother, and I said, okay, I think it's time for you and my dad to split. And they did split. And so my dad had full custody of us. So Dawn was taking care of us full time. He was traveling a lot for work. She was spending the night with us frequently. And she really became our safety point in this place where we, and I'll speak for me, not my brother, because he's not here. It wasn't really a place of safety for me. And she became safety. So I think in that way, she really did. I attribute a lot of my, I don't want to say normalcy, but like, not normal, but like, a lot of my stability to her.
Yeah. And if you had the chance to approach, Dawn has now passed away, correct? Mm-hmm. If you had the chance to document her life story while she was living, how do you think she would have responded to that invitation or that suggestion?
What's interesting is that as I've been thinking about this podcast, I realized I've spent most of my life studying people. If you were to ask me to tell to write a book or tell stories about anyone else in my family, I could write it like a story. And I think that's why I think it gave me a lot of safety growing up. If I could understand someone and study them well enough, then I could predict their behavior.
Right.
Which is how ultimately, I mean, now I study people for a living and I help families understand each other so they can, help maneuver around people's behaviors. And so, I think I can see how that's kind of served me. But when I think about Dawn, I don't know that I can tell you a lot of stories, beginning, middle, and end, because I was always just receiving. And receiving her stories. But I can share some vignettes of some things that I learned about her, and also just like some vignettes to kind of get it. I mean, I could spend 3 hours talking about her, but trying to just like some little brief pictures of her. I think I can.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, please, please. And I think you even have some props.
I did. I guess I brought props. So I think one worth naming, because I've always said kind of as I've sought to understand my own story, knowing like I grew up in a high net worth family, but I was raised by someone who was born in poverty. She was raised by a single mother, and she was one of 33 children by her biological father. And she never met him. So I mean, and then she ended up having a stepfather who was pretty abusive, had a half brother who ultimately lived with her. But I learned after she died, like someone told me a story about like when she was younger, her mom would send her out to sell just goods from their home just so they could support themselves. And what's pretty incredible is the life she built for herself, and the people she collected around her were pretty astounding. And so some stories, well, I think the first thing, and these are kind of fun stories. I mean, they're not super deep, but it's like, when I think about her, it was her delight that she brought into just all parts of her life. The way that she like embodied true delight and simplicity, and just thinking about the way I was raised, where there was a lot of hard and dark, she brought fun.
She brought one.
So I don't know if you collected Beanie Babies.
I had a Beanie Baby. I had a few Beanie Babies, I'm pretty sure. You have a very unique Beanie Baby there, I see. Can you hold it up a little higher just so that we can fully appreciate the ghost figurine?
So sadly, his tag is gone, so he's worthless. No, but so this is Spooky. This is the original Spooky, which matters a lot in my family that I get to keep original Spooky. Because she would pick us up from school and Spooky would drive. And she would hold him on the steering wheel, and, he'd be like, oh no, where am I going? And she'd like take him around the steering wheel, and she had this voice for him. And my brother and I would just like giggle nonstop. And I was like, because you were like, what stories do you have to share? I was like, I don't know. I feel like I have to bring Spooky into this.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it became this thing for us and this symbol. After she died, I was in her home and realized she had collected several Spookies over the years. She even had a really large one. And I got to keep the OG Spooky. But
amazing.
But it was just this symbol for us. I think that things were going to be okay, and that that we could laugh. I mean, my brother and I would just die laughing in the car, and just this picture of delight. She just like her sheer delight and just like simple things in life. You couldn't not love them. She loved Starbucks. I don't like Starbucks coffee. No thanks. Well, if you're around her, you're going to start loving it too, because of how excited she was.
What kind of things would she say? What would happen if she saw a Starbucks? What would she do?
You have to stop and go. But she knew, I mean, there were Starbucks employees at her funeral. I mean, she would just go in and she knew everybody there. And, so like these like little things where you're like, I don't know if I like this thing. Suddenly when you're with her, her joy was such that you wanted to be around it. She was obsessed with this grocery store in Western North Carolina called Earth Fair, which at the end, I could even go back and talk more about it. But But there was this hummus brand she loved called Roots Hummus, which is no longer in business. But I started finding these stickers, and now I started kind of collecting them. I always kind of keep them on me as like this symbol of just this like delight she would bring in. I know I'm talking about silly things like hummus and coffee, but you knew that if you were going to Asheville, she was going to ask you to pick up hummus for her. And then when she would get it, the joy of like, I get to have this hummus, and she would talk about it for days, and she'd be so excited. And thinking about how just culturally, I feel like we feel like we live a lot in a lot of discontent around, I get the thing I want, and then I'm always chasing after more. She was in the moment with the thing that she had and just like celebrating it and delighting in it.
Did she have any phrases? I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot, but did she have any kind of go-to phrases of delight that she would say? Do you remember?
I think honestly, a lot of the ways it was expressed was she kind of recommitted herself to her Christian faith when I was in middle school. And so a lot of it would be, like, oh, thank you, Jesus. Like she would just be so excited, but it wasn't in this like cheesy way. It was in this really earnest, every time there'd be something really simple and delightful that would happen, she would just start celebrating. You get a good parking spot in front of Target. You get, I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesus. Just like that.
Sign is on at Krispy Kreme Donuts, whatever the thing was, like the delight you would experience, was so immense. And not, and the ability, her ability to hold joy in the present moment, was just really, really delightful.
I'm imagining you having grown up in this family that, as you said, was difficult, was complicated, was unsafe. And for her to bring that joy, like, how did that change you from, in the moments that you were with her, or maybe more permanently? Like, what impact has Dawn had on you as a woman, as a person?
Mm-hmm. I think you can't, and I mentioned joy, I've mentioned delight, but also just this, with that, the way she exuded love. I brought another prop, which is heavier, this is her, it's either her grandmother or great grandmother's cast iron skillet.
And you have it.
Do have it. And she, after, when I was in college, she went and got her associate's degree in culinary arts. And a way that she had learned love from her mother was through cooking. And just this, like, just constant kind of giving of herself, by serving people with food, and like food equaled love. And so I feel like that's also worth naming. Just like, it was so exciting that she and I ended up graduating college in the same year, and that she, pursued a career in culinary for a while. And I think, so going back, I feel like it's worth naming because it's another picture of the ways in which she loved. I notice it come up a lot with, I think just in the way that I celebrate life and the way that I live life, is in a way that, like, she was always inviting people in, that, like, it's just, people will kind of tease me about, gosh, like, you talk to everyone on the sidewalk, but that's also how she lived her life. And a lot of it, and it's funny, you think you have healed. I don't think you ever like stop grieving, but I'm aware, like, it's bringing up grief for me, even just to think about, God, like, I wish I could bring my wild daughter down here, except she would interrupt this whole thing. But she's upstairs, and I think in the way that I love her, her name is Harbor, Harbour, which, symbolically was, the symbol of, like, never again will someone in my family not know safety and not be anchored in these things like delight and joy and love. Sorry, it brings up a lot, I guess, but yeah, I don't think that would be who I am if it weren't for for Speaking the Ghost. As simple as it is, I'd like to, can I share a bit? It's another just vignette I'd love to share.
Please,
A picture of
please.
funeral, which I know is a weird way to think about people, but I'm kind of dark and weird. So
And how long ago was her funeral?
she died December of 2019. So it was January of 2020. Which also feels symbolic because it was a big gathering of people. Mm. It was and I think it's like you can't separate her, I think, without seeing the people she collected. She the funeral was in it was in a church that's significant to my family and the town where my family's from. It was a very like old Baptist church in Western North Carolina. It's pretty conservative. It's predominantly white. And the funeral was, I mean, I've always say, I'm like, if this is what heaven is like, it like makes me believe that like this thing could be real. Like, the funeral was presided over by, a Black man and a Black woman, which I was like, has this ever happened in this church? And maybe it had, but it was just felt really powerful. And then the people who attended the funeral, because I sang at her funeral, and I looked out, and you had people there who were from a socioeconomic status background. You had people there who were in the highest rungs of ultra high net worth. You had people who were in some of the lowest rungs of in terms of socioeconomic status. There were, I think, every race and ethnicity was represented. You had several members of the LGBTQ population there, I mean, and just the way that like, when do these people gather in a room? And only a love like hers, I think, can collect that and can bring those people together. And so I think just like that power of inclusivity and the power of the way she looked at people and always saw them as people. And people experienced that as genuine love. It wasn't like, oh, I need to be kind. It's just, she just was love. Mm-hmm. I think is another, big picture of how that showed up.
That's so beautiful. It inspires sort of this question, which is, if you had the chance to document her life story, what do you think you would want to ask her? What are you curious about in regards to how she was raised, or who, anything really? What questions would you have for her at this point now with hindsight?
I would love to know how she kept loving, like continued to love, knowing that she did experience a lot of dark and hard growing up. I believe she would attribute it to her mother. He was a lot like her, from what I understand, but those are guesses, right? Would also love to know why I'd love to understand more of like her loyalty to me and to my brother. At one point, she left her job with my family and started working for another family. And it only lasted a couple of months. They offered her more money. They offered her more, I think, I mean, it would have been financially would have been a better gig. And ultimately, if I were coaching or counseling her, I'd say, you need to take that, and she came back and she stayed with my family because of her love for my brother and me. And just, and I mean, she, in her obituary, which I can send you later if you ever want to read it. I wrote it, so I'm biased. I think it's beautiful. But, I wrote it as if we were her children. And, she would always say, she'd always say, I got all the perks of raising children without having to give birth to them, and so she, but I wish I could have more conversations with her around, like, did you ever doubt? Did you ever, I don't know. Cause to me, I was just, always receiving it. You know, there was like never a moment where I doubted her care. And to be honest, I probably doubt everyone else's. I have a really hard time believing that people aren't going to leave, but I always knew she would stay because it was that sort of grounding love.
Yeah. Are there any mysteries about her that have remained mysteries that you would want to ask her about?
A lot that I probably can't say on this podcast because there are things I learned about her after she passed away. So I think one of those things kept secret. But I have more questions about her love life and her dating life. One, we think, I don't know that she always lived by the advice she was constantly giving me. And I wish we could have had more honest conversations and just been women together. Mm-hmm. And instead of being like, you have to do the right thing. We wish we could have just been like, let's just live. Let's talk about like what a good lived life looks like and how this impacts, you know, like our dating life and our romantic lives.
Yeah.
But we never, I was definitely always like the kid.
Yeah, I get it. And now sort of, it seems like you have a lot more, you know, insight and maybe compassion for your biological mom, it sounds like. Where are you with the interweaving of Dawn and your biological mom in your mind and in your heart? Can you speak to that?
I'd love to. So it's interesting because growing up, and I think developmentally it was also appropriate, but you know, I thought about this very much in a binary. And I think for a while I had to, you know, there was the unsafe parent and the safe parent. There was the bad parent and the good parent. And for a long time, I would say I even defined who I was by what was lacking for me. I think a lot of my personhood was built around I'm the person without a biological mother who could care for me. And I wish, you know, I'm always wishing, gosh, you know, because the reality is I was also being really actively loved by Dawn, but you know, like that original wound was just really, really painful. And there was just a lot of heart. And as I've gotten older and I think and really coming into my own as a parent and, you know, all of those pieces, I no longer see it on the binary of good parent, bad parent. It's interesting because I think there are a lot of adults, even adults older than I am, who still see it that way. But the reality is, my mom is a hurting person who navigated and still navigates life in the best way that she can. My mom works really hard. And in her case, her full-time job is staying alive. It's, you know, she really struggles with mental health and with addiction. And I realized my mom also then, even taking, you know, how things kind of really started to rev up with it, the addiction kind of flared first, but there was also, she's also diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so it was just kind of like flame or fuel to the flame. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Even, you know, I think even then her use of substances, that was her body's efforts to cope with pain. And she's still doing the best that she could. And I've realized that that it wasn't that she was unloving, but that my mom loved me and my brother enough to be willing to step aside and let another woman raise us. And that to me is not a failure, but great, great, profound love. And so I can sit here and say I wouldn't be who I was if it weren't for Dawn. But the reality is the person I am, like I'm here because of two great loves. Um, it's both, this love story that I want to write about Dawn and this person who sacrificed her whole life for me, but also so did my mother. And it looks different. And thinking about, well, how do we define love? And why, what is, and realizing that there's always been goodness there.
Yeah. It's been 4 and some years since Dawn has passed away. And as you were referring to earlier, you've grown in your own motherhood, having a young daughter. And I'm wondering if you did have the opportunity to sit with Dawn again as yourself today, what you would want to say to her.
I'm trying to gather myself. I think about this a lot. This I don't. I used to be like, I don't believe in like talking to people who've passed away, or I don't even know that, but I do. I find myself like talking to her in my bathroom all the time. I talk to her while I'm cleaning this cast iron. Every time I clean it, I'm just thinking about like, let Dawn, I'm washing dishes, because she'd be shocked. But I think I'd want her to hear, and I think that's part of why I want to do the podcast is, like I want to be able to have some, like, I want her to be able to hear me validating, like, you did this for me. And I think she'd say, yeah, I know, sweetheart, I did. I have no doubt that she knows how the impact that it had. She was also really confident. So I know she knows that. I also wish I brought up the hummus and the grocery store. Shortly after just this, gosh, whole nother conversation. My marriage ended in 2019, and she died like less than 8 weeks later. So when she died, it was in a time of my life that was pretty chaotic. I was pretty absorbed in my life change. And a few months after she died, I was trying to date, not really knowing what I was doing. It was actually exactly 1 week before the pandemic started. I go on a date with somebody from the internet and Tinder, because actually, to be more specific, because that's how classy I am. And I meet this man, and we, at the end of our date, we learned that we had both just lost our mother figures, which could be an unwise thing to date someone who's in their first year of grief with their primary attachment figure. But his mother actually passed away probably 10 weeks before she did. So we realized we were both in this first year of grief, and then the pandemic hit. And we had just met, and we decided, okay, let's stay together for a little bit. We'll see how it, we'll just see how it goes. I could talk about the health of our relationship for a long time, but we've been together now for 4 years. And since you and I last spoke, he actually proposed to me, and we're getting married.
Oh my goodness. Congratulations.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm wearing his mother's ring, his mother who passed away.
Wow.
But what's significant about his family is his uncle founded the grocery store where Dawn...
The hummus grocery store?
I mean, this hummus is not... They just sold it at the store.
Yeah. But that grocery store, the Earth
store, the Earth Fair. And it was where... It's this place that brought her so much delight. Like, she would just be tickled. She would just want to, because just knowing that someone was going there, she'd always say, "Oh my gosh, can you pick something up for me?" And then she'd talk about it for days after you brought it back because she was so excited. And I wish she would just, I could think she'd just giggle. She'd be so excited. And so, it's kind of been this funny thing that's come full circle. Is I wish I could tell her like, "Oh, I know good love, and you won't believe this, but they have great hummus in their house, or they have all the alternative milks you loved, or I don't know, just but no, but it feels like this kind of like, this like it was just that you can't make it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful to be able to tell her that the love that she gave you, that you were able to, one, give that to your daughter, I think, and also to find that for yourself in the end. That would be a beautiful thing to be able to tell her, which I think you have.
And that my partner, he and I, we both talk about how we love each other because of the sacrificial love we knew first. And I think that that's really profound. Just like sharing that, yeah, it's the love of others that shaped us today.
Well, I know we could go on and on, but I just want to thank you so much for this beautiful conversation and for sharing Dawn with me and with everyone who's listening.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I know I shared a bunch of silly stories. I'll never be able to capture all of it, but I hope it gives a taste of it.
Absolutely.